Well, Tim, thank you very much for inviting us to do this and guests to the webinar. We're very excited for the opportunity to tell our story. Just by way of introduction, I am pretty well steeped in Jesuit education. I haven't been away from a Jesuit school for more than a couple of months since 1991, St. Ignatius High School, right? St. Ignatius High School in Cleveland, and then St. Louis University for undergrad. I taught at DeSmet Jesuit, also in St. Louis, for 14 years, and now this is year 4 at St. Louis University High School, where I teach AP Micro and Macroeconomics.
Yeah, so I haven't been in Jesuit schools for quite as long, but I graduated from SLUH last year, and now I'm a freshman at Washington University in St. Louis, and I study economics and entrepreneurship.
So this is really exciting, and kind of what Tim was alluding to is that we're here today to tell a story, and there may be some things that you can do that you would learn that would help you create something like this, but that's not really what we're trying to do. Our goal is to explain how people, relationships, and passion came together to do something that we think is pretty cool and pretty exciting. I think you'll find that the specifics of the story are unique, but the themes really can apply in all sorts of different contexts. So this is largely the story of a student organization. And about 8 years ago, when I was still at DeSmet Jesuit, a group of really highly motivated sort of student leaders that were involved in everything, you know, really those sorts of guys that you really, or people rather, both are. I've always been in all-boys school, so excuse my non-gender neutral language. But these are the guys that are really dreaming, that are high achieving. And when this group of about 5 guys, led by one in particular, came to me and said, "We want to start an organization where we learn about business." And I said, "Oh, okay. Well, you know, at DeSmet we try and make it really easy to start a club." And they said, "No, no, no. We don't want to start a club. We want to learn about business by doing business." And I said, okay, well, let's explore that. Tell me a little bit more about what exactly you mean by that. And it became pretty clear that what they wanted to do was file paperwork in the state of Missouri. They wanted to really start a real live business. Initially, they said, yeah, we're going to start a publicly traded company. It's going to be really great. We'll raise capital. We'll do this, that, and the other thing. They had a couple different ideas of what they were going to do. And it became clear to me early on that I did not have the expertise needed to guide these guys. So I went downstairs into the development wing, and I talked to our CFO, and I said, who's a member of our community, somebody that we trust, somebody who cares about the school, who cares about kids, and has a real high level of expertise here. So they put me in touch with a CPA who lived nearby and was a really passionate guy for DeSmet Jesuit, and he came in, and then the 2 of us and these students sat down, and we really started hashing out what they might do. And lo and behold, what ended up happening was the starting of a publicly traded subsection C corporation. They raised several $1,000s in their IPO. One of the computer whizzes that was in this group actually wrote a bid-ask stock exchange, and it is still at this point being traded. I'm still one of the stockholders, even not being there. We did decide not to trade across state lines because that brings in some SEC issues that we didn't want to deal with. But every year, the group prepares 1099 DIVs for the people who receive the dividends for all those shareholders. Anybody who sells their stock for a gain, which it's been a pretty good investment, you know, receives a 1099-B. So these guys, in those first couple of years, started a business, and my tagline was, the only difference between you and Google is the number of zeros to the left of the decimal point. And
he's a really inspirational guy.
And I think that well encapsulated their imagination, and it made them start to think big. We had some really good luck with that first crop of guys getting really aggressive, huge scholarships from pretty fancy schools. That success from an individual level really helped build the club, or build the group around school, build the business, so that all these guys kept coming in. And there were a handful, a small number of businesses that the IBL, the Ignatian business leaders, wanted to run. They were very emphatic that the idea of Ignatian education be in there. They didn't want to be a normal business, but they also didn't want to be a not-for-profit business. They wanted to be a business with a soul. One of the really interesting things that I was incredibly skeptical of from the beginning was their desire to franchise the business. They wanted all of the high schools in the area to have these various businesses. So St. Louis University High School, where I am now, was the first place that they sort of targeted to get one of these franchises going. So they kind of talked to their friends, and one of our end-of-the-year shareholder meetings brought together some interested people from St. Louis U High over to DeSmet. And this kind of interesting collaboration began. Then, after just a couple of years of operation at DeSmet, I had an opportunity to teach some different stuff, so I moved over to St. Louis U High when the group was relatively young here. And the business here was set up as a partnership, not a C corporation, but did the same sorts of things, was still kind of generating revenue. They were operating the rec room concession stand, so during the day, students would run that, and then they could go down and buy things. You see the photo here of our SLUH branded iPhone case. We sold a few hundred of those for a nice, tidy little profit. And then those profits were kind of jammed back into the company to give seed money to the next grade's ideas. That was basically the idea, that the previous grade would kind of fund the future projects. But what we found, and what became kind of interesting, was at DeSmet, even the guys who joined up later on, they were interested in continuing what the first generation had started. But at St. Louis U High, each generation was interested in kind of doing their own thing and learning their own stuff and moving into their own direction, which initially was a struggle because I was worried that we'd work hard to build something and then it wouldn't continue. And I was attached to that, but I had to learn to get away from it in order to allow the students to follow their passion rather than to fit this into some preconceived notion that I had. And what I learned is that the key to unleashing students' passion is to let them drive the direction of the group. So in the following year, they were more interested in entrepreneurship competitions, pitch competitions. St. Louis has a pretty vibrant entrepreneurial community, so they got pretty involved in that. There were students who were inventing things, who were, kind of doing all sorts of stuff. And what it meant to me was, we've got to change, we've got to update, we have to always be moving. And that worked out relatively well. So what you see in these photos here are some of the things that we were able to do. So this is our trip page. Working with the development team, we connected the members of the team, the members of the business, with alumni in Silicon Valley. So you see the Google car there behind the one picture, and then we go to DC. This is them at the Federal Reserve with one of our alums, and then the bottom right corner, the Junior Bills on Wall Street trip, where we go and connect with alums in capital markets. So I'm always trying to ask questions of these students to see what their dream really is and to see how far we can push them. In Jimmy's year, which I think was a really exciting one that worked out really well, we wound up with some really exciting and excited mentors. And these mentors put us into a position where they could really help. So every couple of weeks, everybody would get together, and we realized that we were really running a small business accelerator that he was going to be a part of, with about 4 other businesses at the time, and then he had some guys on his team. He'll tell you all about that. We also brought in another guy who was a junior at Big SLUH, for undergrad, studying entrepreneurship, and he helped develop the accelerators curriculum, which was based on the business model Canvas curriculum, which was pretty helpful. My idea behind this whole accelerator is to help students get their first failure out of the way. So in the entrepreneurial ecosystem, failure is something that we want to embrace, something that we want to build on, and I want them to do something bold, to understand that that bold thing very well might not work out, but get that first failure out of the way in a good, supportive environment so that they can move on to bigger and better things after they leave St. Louis U High. The mentors were on board, the students were on board, the school was on board, and it's produced some great things. So Jimmy's going to talk a little bit about the secret sauce, these relationships, and what made things work out. So I'll pass on to him.
Yeah, thanks. So I came in as a freshman, kind of at the renaissance of the IBL that Kevin was putting together, when he was sort of realizing that the students were going to drive the thing. And so I participated in the concession stand that IBL was putting on, and a few of one of the failed ventures of IBL before the accelerator happened, as well as the Junior Bills on Wall Street trip, which is kind of a formative thing that leads up to the accelerator and the Skydration project, because it was on that trip that I learned about my place within this sort of perfect storm that created this thing, which is that I was a student and I didn't have a lot of knowledge or even that much to prove myself with, but somehow there were these really expert people who wanted to help me with whatever I wanted to do, even if they didn't know what it was, and I wasn't totally sure what it was. IBL and SLUH High had kind of like amassed this network army of people who knew all kinds of cool stuff. So that was a key part of the secret sauce, the perfect storm. But as far as how I actually found Kevin and our relationship that kind of energized the accelerator was through Circus Club. So we spent a lot of time juggling together and putting together circus shows at SLUH High, which is just a ton of fun.
Not the same thing as starting a business, though, we learned.
Oh yeah, not at all. But a lot of similar characteristics. Like, there's got to be a reason why both of us are interested in entrepreneurship and comedy and magic and juggling. I don't know. That's another webinar for another day. But anyway, so we had this. If you look at the third bullet point, we had me as a high school student who kind of realized during this Wall Street trip and the more time that I spent at SLUH that there was a huge network of people and opportunities for me to do something really cool. And so I was in Kevin's office one day at the end of my junior year, and he was like, "I have this list of people who want to fund and advise for small businesses," and we just got really stoked because that was just going to be the thing that we did in the fall. Or next fall, so that was great, and that combined with Kevin understanding how the accelerator had to look, that kind of created the perfect storm. So Skydration systems, the title of the webinar. If you go to the next slide, I believe. Just a little bit of background on that. I'll kind of explain the business and the idea, and then go into more of the origin story. So the Skydration business is a nonprofit, and we are attempting to solve the world's water problem, which is huge, but we perceive the water problem as a problem of walking. So you may or may not know that 200 million hours a day are spent by people walking, much like the girl in the photo, to get water. And that's like one of the greatest tragedies of modern times. For the most part, it's women and girls, and they carry on their heads this bucket, which is really key to our business. That's called a jerry can, this 5-gallon container. That's a recycled fuel container, and it's the ubiquitous water carrying tool. And so jerry cans we are trying to utilize as a solution to the water problem. So what we did basically is we designed a crude plumbing system, which is essentially a hose that connects to a gutter, as you see in the picture. And the hose leads into a jerry can, and then there's a cap, really a stopper, inside the mouth of the jerry can. And another hose comes out of that jerry can and goes into another one. And the physics of it are such that as it rains, water is pushed from the gutter through the jerry cans. And if you had 100 jerry cans lined up in a row, they would all fill up with water. So it's not a huge solution that's going to erase the entire need for people walking, but it takes a good chunk of that time that people are spending walking to get water and allows them the opportunity to go to school or be with their family or anything like that. So we're pulling up a video clip just kind of the system.
All right, so Zach right here is
there it is.
demonstrating water flowing down the roof and into the gutter. The water then drains into the downspout and fills up the first can. After the water level in the first can has risen, it pushes water right here from the first can into the second can, down through the first hole in the second cap. Now the second can's water level is rising. As the second can's water level rises, it then pushes the water again from the can and into the pipe. The pipe then leads to the third can in the line, and then succession continues, filling up as many cans as you'd like.
So it's simultaneously really cool and not that cool at all, because it performs a pretty neat function, but it's really pretty basic science. So right now, as far as the business goes, we are 3D printing these pieces, and they cost us like $4.50 to 3D print, and we have 30 of them on about 6 houses in a small village outside of Nairobi, Kenya, and we are testing to see how this thing works so that we can write a research paper to prove that it works, and then use that evidence to market the idea to NGOs, nonprofits who are already working in areas where people could benefit from this technology, to hopefully sell them the idea and, well, eventually sell them products and allow them to distribute for us. So the end goal is to produce these with a plastic injection mold for about 35 cents a piece. And there's a lot to this kind of business thing. I'm happy to answer questions about it in the question section. So, but then a little bit about how this thing got actualized is the guy in the gray shirt in the picture there is Dr. Martin Schmidt, and I met him at the MedLaunch Idea Day in December of my senior year of high school, and a representative from MedLaunch, which is a biotech incubator based out of St. Louis University, had spoken at an IBL meeting earlier that year and asked if any SLUH students wanted to come and apply to be interns on these MedLaunch projects. And they're all sort of biotech projects that are solutions for physicians. And so I went to apply to be an intern, and I met this guy, Dr. Schmidt, who had an idea for jerry cans collecting rainwater. And that's kind of all he knew, but he wanted someone to design something that had to do with collecting rainwater with jerry cans. He has a nonprofit in Kenya, and he had just kind of observed this and had the idea. So I spoke with him and the president. We decided that I could lead a team of students to solve this problem right alongside the medical students who were writing computer code and building hospital apparatuses. So the idea grew out of this MedLaunch accelerator, or well, that was really an incubator, and then also jumped on the back of the SLUH accelerator. And so that December, well, no, I guess it was really in January, I put together a team of SLUH juniors who knew various things, and that team changed over time, but SLUH students who also came in and helped, and we developed the idea and eventually pitched it in the spring of my senior year. So these pictures right here are just pictures of the development of the idea. A couple of these original kind of sketches and things we're thinking about. The upper right-hand corner is us testing it in a chemistry lab at SLUH. For a while, we had some arguments about whether or not the physics would work. We had a SLUH University PhD student who we were referred to by MedLaunch try and tell us that the water wasn't going to get from the second jerry can to the third jerry can. And so after writing a lot of equations, we finally just decided to set it up and try it out, which is a great lesson of entrepreneurship that I learned in this process, that you can model almost anything very cheaply. What we've got on the screen right now is the actual design of our product. So it's got the two holes. Sorry.
It's turn out.
Oh yeah, it's kind of difficult to use, but
it's a
essentially
3D CAD rendering that one of the students put together that I'm trying to manipulate for you here, so you can kind of see a little bit better what that cork, or what that cap rather, looks like.
Yeah, it's basically, I mean, it's nothing more than an oversized chemistry beaker stopper. We want to produce them in that same kind of rubber, and so they fit really snugly into the jerry can. But yeah, those are pictures of all kinds of different designs. There were a few occasions where I would pitch the idea to engineers, either alums or family connections, and I would sit at these boards of engineers, and they would tell me all kinds of great ideas that they had about how to do this thing. I had one guy advise that we ship to the developing world a bunch of umbrellas and have people flip their umbrellas upside down and cut holes in the bottom, and then they could catch rainwater and they would feed it into the jerry cans. So that was one of my first experiences with real grown people who get paid lots of money to do things very well, having no idea what the heck they're talking about, which is also a lesson of entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
And growing up. But I think, that is all of those pictures. So that's a really, really quick run through of the story of Skydration and how it was born out of SLUH and IBL.
So Tim, at this point, if you want to see if anybody's got any questions and take over your moderating duties, we appreciate your listening.
Yeah, what a great story, both in its early stages at DisMed and how that turned out to provide the soil or the fertile grounds by which ideas like this can get sprung. Kelly Wilson submitted a question. Kelly, I'm not sure if I can or can't turn your microphone on. I'm not seeing that you have microphone access, so I'll ask the question for you. The question is, how do you handle who gets any profits? What if you had a project or idea really go big, if you thought about that?
So within IBL, the intellectual property is owned by the people who come up with each thing. Once the activities kind of wrapped that were school related, things like the concession stand, for example, we moved away from the kinds of things that were directly related to the school, and then we moved into supporting students who were running their own businesses. It works better from a liability perspective, it works better from a profit perspective, and it encourages the students to do their own thing on their own. And we found that in the 4 or 5 who have gotten to similar stages of where Jimmy is, they need that ownership motivation. So our hope, of course, is if we have the next Snapchat, they will remember us. But there is no profit sharing agreement at this point.
Good. Other questions? Kelly says, that's great. Thanks, Kelly, for, I'm sorry you were microphoneless at this point, but I'm getting your message. Anyone else with a hand to raise or a question to ask? Brian, hang on just a second here. Brian, your microphone's on now.
Hey, hey, Jimmy. Hey, Kevin.
Hello.
Brian Gill. I'm just wondering how you articulate the connection between this awesome idea to the question of mission within the schools. It's pretty awesome.
I'll take this one. You want me to?
I'm not sure I totally comprehend the question.
So I think I have an idea. Where does business fit within education? Where does a profit motive work within a Jesuit school? And
oh man,
yeah,
that's huge.
Didn't exactly throw a softball to us, but that's okay. We
hey, you know, I get a little crazy after 4 o'clock, so.
right. So I think the big thing is, and it gets back to what makes it the Ignatian business leaders, right? So Jimmy was just talking about, when we were driving over here, the idea of contemplation and action, and I'm a big believer in reflection and building these habits, right? So that the iterative process that is deeply, deeply involved with entrepreneurship fits very well with the stories of the early society. You know, Ignatius, who said that he would never be involved in education because he didn't want to be tied down to buildings. He didn't want to, you know, pray in the litany of the hours. And then we see that his ultimate decision to set the world on fire through education is, you know, very different from where he was. So that idea of always having a plan B, a plan C, a plan D is very important. For making sure students understand that sort of thing. Additionally, part of the reason that I think Skydration had the legs that it had is because it does good. It's his story has been more compelling than some of the other ones because the motivation was so clearly related to taking care of God's people. And he's had great success in raising money, in telling his story, because it connects so well to our mission. You got anything to add?
Yeah, also, so I go to a secular school now, and I study in the business school for half of my classes, and that's been an interesting perspective as far as everybody's got their own kind of thing that drives them to learn how to play the game of entrepreneurship and the business world. And to some extent, it's a pretty comprehensive field of study. Like, you've got to know a lot of things in order to sell, develop, and drive an idea. And having done all of those things and learned them at SLUH, there's kind of a meaning to it all that everyone understands. And you know, I believe that meaning is like objectively better than any meaning that anyone else has. But at a place like WashU, there's like a real disconnect when everyone's kind of doing everything for different reasons. So the solidarity of knowing that we're all coming at it from the same route is like super awesome.
Yeah. Wonderful.
All
Brian,
right.
did that answer your question?
Yeah, no, yeah, that was a great answer. Thank you.
Interesting, two different voices there from a common project. Excellent. Thank you, guys. We have Kelly has asked, this seems like it has to be a student-generated or desired program. What do you think of a top-down approach of, open quote, build it and they will come, close quoted?
To some extent, that's what happened. For me, I got a lot of opportunities shoved in my face, and I was like, man, this is great. I'm going to do something. And I had no idea what I was going to do, but I kind of, having been presented with the network and the opportunity, I was just kind of sure that I was going to come up with something. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
the four other members of the accelerator last year were, they themselves were further down the road when they arrived than Jimmy was. So I think what we didn't have was what some of the Jesuit schools that I've talked to have. What maybe what SLUH is trying to build is, the idea of makerspace and things like that. I think there's a certain amount of sexiness that is pretty present right now in STEM thinking, and pretty much everybody is understanding the connection between engineering and entrepreneurship and those sorts of ideas. So I think that schools who are creating just a holistic environment of innovation probably have something that SLUH did not have last year and 2 years ago when we were really pushing this, because it wasn't, there are no business classes taught at St. Louis U High during the school year. Economics, what I do, is the closest thing to it, and certainly that's not a business class. So a lot of other schools have a little bit more organic connection to business than we do. I think that it probably could go either way, but I tell you, if it's driven from the students, it's going to be a whole lot easier.
Thank you. If there are any other questions, raise a hand or submit a question. Otherwise, we can bring things to a close. It's now past 5 p.m. on the East Coast. Jimmy and Kevin, wonderful to hear your voices in concert with one another. Although they're unique, they bring a unique perspective based on your relationship and role in this project. This is really an inspirational piece here. So kudos to both of you, not only for thinking of it and doing it, but your ability to articulate it here with us this afternoon. So thank you. Thanks for those of you who attended. I'm going to close up the recording here. I'll ask Jimmy and Kevin to stay aboard for a few minutes. The rest of you, enjoy the rest of your day and weekend. Have a good weekend ahead, okay? Thanks so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks a lot.